Welcome to the Business Trendsetter Podcast, where we talk about trends and how to use them to grow your business. My name is Manny Charan.
And I'm Adam Hartung.
We're Spark Partners. We're here every week on our podcast to really showcase all things trends, and we look at what's happening in the world, and we help you to identify these trends so you can use them in your business. The magic and the power of trends is that that's where the market is going. And there's a lot of trends out there. There's thousands of them. But Adam and I like to focus on kind of the top 60 or 70 of them. One of those that's really big and is driving the conversation that we're having here, driving the fact that you're listening to this somewhere. And that is, of course, energy. Energy is pervasive. And, you know, we've been an electrified world for the past 150 years or so, give or take. And one of the first and most resilient ways of powering and creating power is coal. Coal, of course, is in the crosshairs of the environmentalists, and that is another major trend. So today I want to talk about the UK's last coal-powered power plant shutting down and some of the new ways that are going to be explored and expounded upon for powering the island of Great Britain there, but also it's pervasive around the world as well. So let's talk about that to begin with, Adam. And in a very interesting shotgun manner, we're going to kind of go through in a couple of other topics that are not related to energy, but are also very much in the news today.
Well, I think the biggest thing I want to talk about when it comes to this nuclear energy situation is understanding trends and how to apply trends. And once again, we have headlines that are not trendy, but could confuse you very much so. So, you know, I'm old enough to remember I was out of college or either in college or just graduating when they had the 3 Mile Island incident, in which we did almost have a nuclear meltdown in the United States, similar to what they had in Russia. It didn't happen, but we came very close. And what that did was it alerted people to the risks of 3 Mile Island, of nuclear power, that if when it works, it makes the cost of the fuel is very inexpensive, and the worst thing you do to the environment is put out steam and hot water. And then you get these rods, but the rods are small and they can be contained. And as a professor I had when I took my energy policy class said, they are so inexpensive and the amount of fuel they produce is so great that you could coat them in gold, then coat that in platinum, put it in a rocket ship and send it to outer space to get rid of them. And you would still have profitable nuclear power. So anyway, we stopped nuclear power. Why did we stop nuclear power? Because it is dangerous. Now, overseas, if you went and looked in France, they've basically developed 2 different kinds of nuclear power plants. And all the nuclear power plants in France are one of those 2 types. What happens with anything, and you know this, Manny, the more you do it, the better you get. You know, you work on something in your yard, and then the second time you do it, and the third time you do it, and by the 4th time you do it, you figured out some shortcuts. You figured out how to make it really work and be safe and not have mistakes, right? The joke in the United States was we never built 2 nuclear power plants the same. And it's really true. We didn't. Everyone was unique. And that was a big part of the risk that got into nuclear power. So now we've got 3 Mile Island is going to be reopened. We know that. And what we know is they've done a lot of work on it, and they've improved the processes, and the safety of that power plant is just far, far, far exceeds what it was like in the 1970s when it was built. So there's no real reason to be particularly concerned about that plant or any other nuclear power plant that's being reopened. But I think it's foolish to say we're going to build a lot more of them. The trend is still sustainable energy, and sustainable energy is green energy, and that comes from wind and solar and things like dams, water from dams and rivers. So that is where the trend is, and that hasn't changed. Bill Gates, so I was reading something, and somebody asked me, well, what about Bill Gates? He's investing in nuclear power. Totally different. Not the same thing at all. I mean, what he's talking about are these nuclear cells that you put literally in a neighborhood, or you put next to a factory. It's very, very small facility. It's very contained, and it produces enough power for thousands of homes, or it could produce enough power for a group of factories. It produces, I don't want to make it a joke, it produces a good amount of power, but we're talking about something that's maybe the size of a large barn, as opposed to what we're used to seeing with those giant, tall cooling towers and everything that goes along with it. So I think the story here is for people to not be sitting there saying, oh, we're going to go back to the 1970s and 80s when we tried to build all the nuclear power plants. And a lot of the "I told you so" and people that keep talking about how inexpensive nuclear power is. Nuclear power is very, very expensive. If you had to build a new power plant, it's ridiculously expensive.
Right.
So
Billions
all
and
of these
billions.
stories are about people opening up ones that have been closed. Go ahead, Manny.
Yeah, billions and billions to build these things, and of course, the recent scare, if you will, is the Fukushima power plant
Yeah.
in Japan, and there's all this conversation about oh my God, the sky's falling because there was the tsunami, and it created some issues with that. But overall, nuclear power it's clean, it's safe, and it can provide a long-term sustainable pathway beyond the traditional fossil fuels.
Yeah, and I think there's also this issue we have to look at, which are trade-offs that you have to make. And this, actually, all business people have to be aware of this. We come in with, here's the long-term answer. It's going to be solar, it's going to be wind, it's going to be these sustainables. But there are trade-offs along the way. And when you build a business plan, and Manny, when you and I work with people, we have to say, well, what can you do this year on your way towards where you want to head? It's kind of like you can't walk into Ford and say, make your whole fleet electric in 1 year. It doesn't work that way. You have a transition plan that you have to go through. And so one of the things we're seeing here is that coal is really bad. It's really bad in terms of all things. It's really bad. Just a side story. My family started off as people that did the run into Oklahoma, got land for free, and were initial farmers. And anyway, farmed along for a long time until we got into about the 1960s, and all these family farms were going broke. Ours was quite large, but it was going broke. It was not going to survive, even though we had 10 sections. But it was the economics of farming changed dramatically, especially under Carter. It was just terrible. Well, what happened was Oklahoma Gas and Electric decided to build a coal-fired power plant, and our property was sitting in a situation where they could build a lake to use for the cooling of the steam in the plant, and that would not touch any rivers. And they didn't want to touch any rivers because that would destroy the life. If you put hot water and then you shut it off, all the fish will die. So the hot and cold and all that kind of stuff, you have to have your own retaining pond. And they bought out our land and saved my uncle and saved the family on that. The reality was they built the pond, and then after 4 years they realized they'd bought more land than they needed, so they bought the land at prime prices as if it was all wheat land, and they sold it back to us as scrub parceland. And so it saved the family farm, which still exists to this day. That old coal-fired power plant then led to these coal trains that used to start up in Wyoming and Montana and North Dakota, and they would ship the coal down to these coal-fired plants. And it got to the point that the trains were so long that you could be stuck for 45 minutes to an hour sitting on a road waiting for one of these. I don't know how many cars they were in those. But they literally could take 45 minutes to go by. And so coal was a big, big deal in the 60s. And it was the thing that made really, really cheap power. It was cheaper than petroleum, especially. And so it was going to be the future. But we now know that it's just very, very dirty. It's bad for the environment. It produces methane as well as other bad products into the atmosphere. So, it's time for coal to go. And a trade-off is maybe we bring back these plants that are sitting there. We just have to get them going again. That's not building a new plant. It's getting the old ones going again. And that's a reasonable trade-off. It really is. The risk reward on that is a really good trade-off. And that's part of what we have to do as business people is we don't get caught up in your religion. Don't get caught up saying, well, nuclear power is bad, to the point that you don't consider it as something you could use in a 20-year environmental change, which is, it's going to take a long time for the industry to switch. And so that's what we have to start saying is, well, maybe something that I don't really want to do is the thing I could do to help me transition to the future where I need to end up.
Yeah. And I think that that's a really good example, Adam, of the kind of long-term thinking that needs to be adopted by a lot of our audience. A lot of leaders tend to lead quarter by quarter. Yeah. This next quarter, these are the metrics and that we're hoping to shoot for. And a lot of the driving is done in the rearview mirror, of course. And, you've got to look at a lot of the drivers of, we need to have clean, reliable, and scalable energy in not only in the US, but all over the world, if we want to continue to produce things and make things and power the economy. AI doesn't come for free. AI has to be run on servers, which is tied to all the stuff we've talked about with Intel and TSMC and all that. But it also has to be run on power, and you're not going to get anywhere if you don't have a clean source of power. Solar has a lot of benefit to it. Wind has a lot of benefit to it. And, I've got people that I know across the board that are pushing back on solar even to this day. They don't believe that it's viable. They don't believe that it's scalable. They think that, of course, that there's some geopolitical reasons. They feel as though the Chinese have us in a headlock with respect to panels. But, nuclear is a different story.
And again, part of this idea of transition, we can make a lot of solar right there in your backyard, Manny, and in Vegas, where I was for so many years, so much time. But the reality is the demand isn't necessarily where the sun is the easiest to produce all the power. And also, you don't want to build these solar farms in the middle of a residential community. And so you have to move the electricity. Well, the power lines are out of date. I mean, they're not up to snuff to move that amount of power to a Los Angeles or, to a Dallas or some other big city. And so we know now that we have to upgrade all those power lines. And so you sit there and say, okay, how long is that going to take? Well, again, we're looking at one of those 10-year, 15-year efforts it's going to take to pull out the old lines, put in the new lines, and maybe add some lines along the way. So this becomes a step in the way to get there. And so it's important that our listeners start to think about when they look at something, is the trend really that we're going to go to nuclear power? No, because that would mean building the trend. For it to be trend, we'd have to say we're going to build new plants. We're going to go out there and start to site in and build at a cost of $25 to $30 billion a piece, a new power plant. And so the reality is we're not going to do that. What we're doing is we are going to revitalize these plants that have been mothballed. We'll bring them online as we go through the process of doing of expanding the network across the United States and bringing online all kinds of other forms of new energy production that meet our needs. So be sure when you look at headlines that you don't get seduced into thinking that just because it's a headline, it's a trend. That's the biggest thing I want to think about. And it also, for me, one of the pain points I have about this is my entire life, I have listened to people like Joe Manchin, who's the senator from West Virginia, who's not going to run for re-election, talk about, coal miners in West Virginia. And for my entire life, I've thought to myself, you mean there's still coal miners in West Virginia? Yeah. It's kind of like, the Industrial Revolution started 150 years ago. We've been in the information age now for 30 years. You know that the future of coal has been to get smaller and go away for 35, 40 years. We know that the strip mines in the northern part of the United States are not good for the ecology. And we know that people that work in coal mines get black lung disease when they're underground. What startles me is that 50 years later, literally 50 years later, we haven't, as a nation, found a way to bring better education and skills to people that are in these coal mining areas of Kentucky and West Virginia so they could have good jobs. The cost of living in Silicon Valley is ridiculously high. And,
yes,
if you're a family in West Virginia and somebody said, well, let's go someplace where there's better jobs. And you even talk about Tucson. Tucson's not an expensive town compared to Silicon Valley, but it's a lot more expensive than living in West Virginia. And so it takes national policy, not just state policy. You can't just say to somebody, well, lift yourself up by your bootstraps. Why don't all the people of West Virginia invest in education? It's like they are. They're investing as much as they can, as good as they can to do the best they can. But if we don't get a national policy that says, how do we try to help these people get the right kinds of education that makes them able to get better paying jobs and then get them into a remote work environment so that they don't get stuck having to move somewhere they can't afford to live and away from their families that they care about and their mothers and grandmothers. We could do that. So, but at the same time, I say, it does kind of go to that hillbilly elegy concept of the current vice presidential candidate, which says that if you're stuck in one of these communities, just leave. That's what he wrote in his book. I don't like that answer. It doesn't really fit the American way in my mind. But on the other hand, I can't imagine somebody who's 20 years old today saying they want to be a coal miner. Right. You just know it's not a good thing. So, yeah. It's time. It is the information age. It is the artificial intelligence age, and it is time to move on.
I went to a breakfast this morning. I go to this meeting every 2 weeks or so, and we had a local municipal leader. Not really. He's not in politics per se, but he represents a business group. And we've got a big election coming, obviously, in November. But not only just the presidential side, there's a lot of state and municipal things on the ballot. And one of the ones that he talked about ad nauseum was a bill introduced by the bipartisan, by the way, by the Republicans and Democrats, to keep things the way things are with respect to election policy. And sometimes you might think, oh, well, that's kind of cool. Things aren't going to change very much. But what it does is it shuts out a third voice. So if you don't ascribe to either the right or the left or the Republican or Democrat side, then you don't have a voice. And in Arizona, a third of the electorate is independent. And because the way things are labeled right now, the way things operate in the government, they don't have a voice. We don't have a voice. And I just think that it's a lot of the status quo mentality as it pertains to politics. And, obviously we don't get too deep into politics here, Adam, but sometimes we kind of have to, because it has to do with business and it has to do with our livelihood.
And the other thing I always point out to people is that all of the trends at the end of the day went out. I had somebody recently complain that they were having trouble hiring some people for their jobs. And one of the comments they made that, they were either getting people that were wildly underqualified, people that were job turners and they didn't like that, or as they put it, people at the end of their career who were willing to take a junior job. And those were three categories, and they were rejecting all of them. And I said, the last one sounds an awful lot like age discrimination. Why is it with the demographics of this country, you have people that are in their late 50s, 60s, and even early 70s who are very capable of doing an awful lot of different kinds of jobs. And I don't understand why you wouldn't consider them as employees. So again, this is about how do I get from A to B? How do I go from here to an artificial intelligence world? And how do I staff my existing business in the way as I'm getting towards a new business? And some of these jobs are things that people that are older, they know how to work these computers and they know how to do these things. They can help you out with your accounts receivable, your accounts payable, or managing the security for your building, or a whole lot of jobs that these people can do while you're figuring out how the future solution using robots and machine learning and neural networks is going to be able to take it on in 5 to 7 years. So I found it startling that she was kind of like, I don't really think I want to go with these people end of their careers, as she put it. And I was kind of like, man, that seems to me like you're just walking away from one of the great transition opportunities.
Very short-sighted. And, we talk a lot about big companies making moves in new directions. And, we call it blank space. Richard Branson called it white space. And it's the idea of trying something new to see how the market reacts in a very prescribed way. And one of those that is making another move in that direction is Apple. Apple has done a lot of things in its day that are very innovative and has tried, they tried to build the Apple car and they sort of mothballed that, but they're taking a second bite at the apple, if you will, with respect to the movie business. And so let's kind of switch gears, Adam, and talk about that transition and that second bite at the apple.
Yeah, so I think Apple's a pretty novel company, and they tend to be pretty innovative, and they've introduced a lot of innovative products. And they decided to get in the competition with Netflix and Amazon Prime and Disney and Hulu, trying to say, okay, we're going to offer to people entertainment. Okay, it's a big market. It's a growing market. Broadcast television is dying. Streaming is the future. Why not get in there and try to participate and grow? And the interesting thing, though, is that they went at it by throwing money at it to make movies, and often traditional movies. And so now, after they've done it for a few years, we know that they've spent about $20 billion on movies that they first released in theaters and then brought to streaming later. And out of the 20 billion, they've lost billions. They've spent that and not even come close to getting any of it back. The one movie I read about online was they spent $500 million to make it. I think it was Killers of the Flower Moon. Anyway, they spent $500 million and weren't even going to come close to recovering their money. And I look at that and I compare it with the podcast that we did 5 weeks ago, I think it was, about YouTube. And where YouTube started out same way, started spending a lot of money, but then stepped back and said, wait a minute, what if we just went with user-generated content? And so they said, users, go out there, generate content. If you build an audience, we'll bring you advertisers, and then we'll pay you for that content. So they switched and started putting no money into the game. and started pushing the content of people that were doing it on the comm. And now they, as we put in that last podcast, as we told people, they're the number one minutes of on television these days. If you go turn on televisions around the United States, there are more minutes go to YouTube than anything else. And the cool thing is, unlike Netflix and everybody else, they're not putting any money down up front. So they're guaranteed to make a profit. And so again, what we have to do is take a look when you get ready to do something new, be careful that you don't make the mistake of trying to do the old form of the business model. You know, the story I tell in my speeches that I give a lot of times is about how when Virgin set out to launch an international airline, the team that put together, first off, interviewed all the airline executives and the airframers and came back and told Richard Branson he was going to need $20 million and all this time to try to put an airline in place. And he looked at him and said, no, I don't have any money. I'm not going to do it. If you got to figure out a better way, you got to figure out a way that works for us. And they did. You know, they put a lot of creativity into it. And that's that white space team that he had, the blank space team. And when he said, quit thinking like the traditionalists and think like what we need to really get done to launch an airline, they were able to take this company that at that time was doing nothing but selling records. I mean, records. I hope everybody understands, you know, old-fashioned LP, album, vinyl records. That's what they did. And they got into the airline business, but they didn't do it the way another airline does. In this case, Apple is trying too hard to do what the broadcast guys did initially and then what Netflix did, and they're trying to play the game the old way, and it's costing them an awful lot of money. And, you know, again, they're trying to release things into movie theaters so that they can try to get more awards, thinking that's going to draw more people in. And today, what we know is attendance and viewership of award shows like Emmys and Oscars and that sort of thing is down. We find that people are more getting, you know, they're wandering themselves through these streaming services. They're watching an episode. They're talking to their friends. They're looking at social media to see what people are watching. They're asking folks about it. And, you know, to some extent, an influencer makes a recommendation. They take a look at it, right? And so that's where Apple should be putting its money. It should say, I'm making this stuff for streaming. I'm going to run it through. I did watch Killers of the Flower Moon because they shot it, a lot of it, like literally one county away from where I grew up. And it was fun for me to see the geography and see things going on. But there were just, you know, mistakes in the movie that I knew caused it to be difficult for people in my part of the world, that they would look at it and say, oh, this is wrong. You know, for example, the two lead actors were 40 years too old to play the parts they had. That was a big problem. Because once again, they traditionally picked actors that they thought would draw an audience rather than actors that actually fit the part. And then the movie got something ridiculous, like 3.5 hours long. So it took forever to watch the thing. And they just had so many issues about it that, of course, it didn't play in the theaters. Then when it took to the streaming, they didn't have an audience built up, and they'd missed their chance to have a splash at the opening. So again, back to, it's easy even for a big, talented, innovative company to make a launch that didn't work out. Remember when Facebook launched the VR headsets, right? Zuckerberg's out there screaming and yelling, but he didn't have a killer app. And so it went badly. Now, what has happened this last 2 weeks is that at Meta, they've retooled and they've come back, and instead of pitching headsets as something that's going to be, you know, that we'll be having meetings using our headsets, virtual meetings, and we'll be wanting to use a headset instead of looking at a screen. That was where they were. Now they're come back and they're really targeting it against gamers, and the excitement level is much, much higher. It's much higher now. And people can understand how gamers individually playing a game or in group sessions with a game, they're sitting in an environment where the headsets can be really helpful. It can use their geospatial selves, like moving their head to affect the game. And you got a lot more excitement about that. And also the movement towards making something that's actually wearable, like the Ray-Ban sunglasses that are going to have some virtual reality built in. Right. They're still early generation. But what I'm getting at here is that Zuckerberg changed. He was going down a traditional route of launching a product, trying to launch it to the business community, not getting any developer interest to speak of, not getting enough sales to come close to profitability. He's retooled, switched now, and he's pushed it over to gaming, which is growing much faster and for which the headset makes a lot more sense. And that's what Apple needs to do with streaming. And that's, again, what I come back to our people, our people. When I go back to the people listening to this broadcast who tend to be small and mid-sized companies, those are the people that we're trying to help the most, and helping the CEO of a small and mid-sized company is saying, be careful you don't get trapped into doing it the old-fashioned way. Somebody tells you, well, this is the way we did it 20 years ago, or this is how the industry works. we're going through transitions. And again, when you go through transitions, you've got to put your mind in that, as you said, Mandy, the white space, blank space. You got to get your mind there. What's the way to make this happen? And you might turn around like the energy industry is doing and say, hey, I shut down these nuclear power plants. Let's reopen them. That's the good way to get from A to B. What's your definition of that in your business? What's the thing you could do that you could say, hey, this would help get me to the solution I need? And you have to get creative about it. And if you don't find yourself as the CEO or the chief marketing officer with the time to do that, you need to reallocate your time. You need to find somebody that can do the problem solving day to day so that you can think about the future. Right? If you're spending your time thinking about the day-to-day and you're not thinking about the future, well, who do you think is going to lead your company?
Exactly. And that's what, for those that know, I run a company, and we have a very historical business that has an avenue into the semiconductor industry, which is fine. But what I do day to day, I look at what are the other major things that are happening in the world that we can align our business to. And it is very much cutting against the grain sometimes of the way that other companies think about, okay, we make this widget and that's all we've ever done. And we have to just figure out ways to make new widgets just like the one we made. And that's not always going to be the answer. I mean, I'm here to take this company to the next level, and it might be on a different boat. It may not be on the same boat. And by the way, that movie, I did not like it one bit. That Killers of a Flower Moon was a terrible movie, in my opinion. Too long. It wasn't that exciting. And you're right. I mean, the Leo character was supposed to be like a 20-year-old, and here he is, in his late 40s, my age, trying to play a 22-year-old.
I agree with you entirely about that, Manny. I really, really do.
I don't know how it won all those awards. And so, for the last shotgun approach here, let's talk about one of the darlings of the industry. It's still a private company, but they have released some records saying that, they're going to be looking at an $11 billion year next year. And that is, of course, OpenAI. That's the makers of ChatGPT and other AI tools. So let's talk about them and, kind of why they're growing so quickly. I think right now they're making about 300 million a month, and they're going to be doing, looking at over almost 12 billion next year.
Yeah. So OpenAI, the founders of ChatGPT, growing like a weed. They started off as a non-for-profit company, which is fine. But the reality is that now we've proven that this is an important part of the future, kind of like the internet is, right? And you start saying, what do I have to do to keep building these large language models? What do I have to do to service people making the queries on the large language models? What do I have to do whenever somebody wants to buy one of my AI and then build their own model on top of it, do something on top of it? You need to have a lot of servers to do that. And it's quite obvious that the next step for OpenAI is they're going to have to invest 20 to 30 to $40 billion in data centers. We've talked about Microsoft and their big investment in data centers. Apple's doing the same. Google is doing the same. I'm sorry, Alphabet. Google's doing the same, as is Meta, Facebook. And so they're going to have to raise a lot of money, and they can't do that if they can't offer people a rate of return. And so the net of it is they're going to have to become a for-profit company. And that's caused a lot of the founders that were part of the original 15 people who founded the company have left because they don't like that idea. And my answer to that is, okay, good. We need good academics. We really do. And go find the right place where you can do the research and do the thinking that you want to do. And I'm sure they will make a huge contribution to the future of artificial intelligence, both technologically, but also as well as regulations and how we can make sure the bad things don't happen. But for the rest of us, we should be gleeful about this because it means that we're going to have more opportunities to expand this technology and make it more usable. And that's a really good thing. And so, going full circle, we need the electricity, as we said up front, and we need it to power AI. And we're going to get better and more AI when OpenAI is converted over to a for-profit company that can raise money and offer a rate of return to its investors. So, again, the journalists that are writing about this always feel compelled to say there's two sides to every story. And they've tried to make the argument that somehow this is bad, and I still haven't found any kernel of truth in it. Because, again, the people who are leaving that have a high focus on security, who have a high focus on potential problems that AI could could create, they're going to go to academia and they're going to go into government and places where their minds will be very functional and they can be very helpful at regulating and giving insight and technological advancement to the companies who have a for-profit interest in it to develop and grow the technology. So anybody who thought this was a bad move, no, it's a good move and a really good move.
So I was evaluating, or I am evaluating tools for, we talk about bias a lot, at Spark Partners, Adam and I, about how it's kind of bad for hiring and the ability to bring in the right resources in your company. So I've been evaluating some tools that we can use at my other company when we do our hiring processes. And one of these tools is an interview tool. It's an complete AI tool from start to finish. Everything in the tool, it asks you questions and almost like it's a person, and you give it answers, and then it takes your answers and asks other questions that are based on your answers, and it kind of goes down this elaborate rabbit hole that it's like you're talking to a real person, but it's all by computer keystroke. And then the second element of this tool is mind blowing. Actually, it's an AI tool that's testing you on how to write a script. An AI script to do a certain task. And it evaluates your ability to write a script to do this task. And I thought that was mind blowing. It said, here's an Excel spreadsheet and write a script to be able to take the certain column and make some decisions based on that. And I was just blown away because I actually was able to do it, and not initially, but once you start thinking and actually operating these AI tools, there is so much power in them. We haven't even scratched the surface. Yep.
It's true. Next week, I think we'll talk some more about some companies that are doing that and creating their success. But it's been a great half hour talking about these topics, how to do it right.
A little shotgun approach.
Yeah, and again, so the big thing here is don't let headlines change your get you confused. Focus on the trend, follow the trend, and you'll be okay long term. And number two, when you start to go into transitions, don't just do it the way everybody's always done it. Create the white space, blank space team, and then get thoughtful about how to make the transition happen. Get creative. Don't get stuck in a rut of trying to do it the way things have always been done. And then look for the newest tools that you can bring to bear, which these days is artificial intelligence. And I hope that people walk away with those lessons from this session.
Yeah, I think so, Adam. So thanks for your time. We'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.